Massive tariffs will soon impact antiques and vintage items imported to the U.S. from around the world. 20% on items coming from continental Europe, 10% from the U.K., and a staggering 54% on items from China. Will the tariffs be negotiated away over the coming weeks, paving the way for more equitable global free trade? Or will they slam into the antiques industry like a Mack truck? And what will that mean for antique supply and prices going forward? Let's get to the bottom of it. Hello my antique loving friends, and welcome to another episode of Antique Acquisitions. Today we're diving into how increasing tariffs could affect the antiques market, why your favorite imported pieces may suddenly cost more, and what you can do about it. Let's get started by defining what a tariff is. A tariff is very simply a tax placed on goods coming into a country. Governments historically use tariffs for the following reasons: to raise revenue, as a strategic move during trade disputes, and to protect local industries from going out of business when they can't compete against cheaper imports. As I'm sure you're aware, the U.S. government has just placed tariffs on goods coming in from many countries around the world, including many of our biggest trading partners. What we want to analyze is how and why this will impact the antiques market. Unlike mass-produced goods, antiques are unique, often irreplaceable. The vintage world thrives on global movement, and many of the best pieces are imported, especially from Europe and Asia. U.S. dealers source pieces from France, England, Italy, and Japan, bringing them to markets and fairs across the U.S. You've probably seen a dealer at Round Top or Brimfield say something like, "Just got this off the boat from Paris." But importing antiques involves more than just shipping. It includes customs declarations, import duties, sometimes conservation costs, and now apparently tariffs. Let's say a dealer purchases a $4,000 19th century sideboard in France for import. Then they pay another $1,000 for shipping and customs. That's $5,000 landed here in the U.S. Now tack on the new 20% tariff, and voila, the price of that sideboard to the dealer has just gone up another $1,000 for a total cost of $6,000. Now typically a dealer, just like any other retailer, charges a markup on their acquisition cost. To keep the equation easy to follow, let's say the dealer typically marks up their cost by 100%. Before the tariff, that piece would have retailed for double the dealer's cost, or $10,000. Now, it will retail for 2 times the $6,000 acquisition cost, or $12,000. Now you may say, but wait, that only affects the price on new antiques being brought into the country, not the ones that are already here in the U.S. But hold on, because now that private seller on Facebook Marketplace can look at the newly increased prices from dealers and charge more than they would have for a comparable item because they are now competing against the dealer's higher price. Of course, the same goes for new non-antique items being imported. When the price on new tables goes up, the price on pre-existing tables is bound to go up as well, since they are what is referred to in the world of economics as substitute products. But the effects of tariffs are not just limited to pricing. Let's say that when the dealer raises prices, they end up selling less pieces. Economists refer to this type of demand as elastic, meaning that an increase in price results in a significant decrease in demand. This means that fewer items will need to be imported to meet demand at the higher prices. Or perhaps the dealer chooses not to pass on the cost to their customers, or only passes on part of the cost and ends up making less as a result. In that case, it's possible that the dealer makes so much less that they no longer have a financial incentive or the capability to continue importing items at all. In both of these scenarios, incoming supply to the U.S. falls, and prices on foreign-made vintage pieces that are already here in the U.S., which have already risen to match the price of newly imported pieces, rise even further, reflecting the lack of incoming supply. Of course, these principles don't just apply to antique furniture, but to vintage items of all types. And unlike sectors where these supply constraints can be remedied by increasing production in the U.S., antiques cannot be manufactured. Those that exist now comprise the pool of all the antiques that there will ever be. And incidentally, each year that pool becomes just a little bit smaller due to loss, breakage, destruction by fire, and age-related deterioration. Which reminds me, don't forget to check out my previous video on how to hedge against inflation and transfer generational wealth through collecting antique art. Now, one might expect a bit less of an impact on prices for antiques that were made in the United States to begin with, though they will undoubtedly rise some, as they are to some degree substitute products for foreign-made antiques. In fact, these tariffs might even cause renewed interest in American-made antiques, like federal pieces, arts and crafts furniture, or even early 20th century industrial, since they may be relatively cheaper. But please keep in mind that some of these price adjustment mechanisms take time to manifest. So here's 3 quick tips for collectors on how to position for the potential changes. First, start watching local estate sales and regional auctions for items that interest you. Second, build relationships with dealers who already have European stock in the US, which, by the way, a note to you dealers with significant foreign stock, your inventory value may have just increased significantly. Finally, be flexible. That Swedish Mora clock might cost more, but maybe a Shaker tall case clock scratches the same itch. Now you might ask, have we ever seen anything like these tariffs before? And if so, what happened then? Well, the answer of course is yes. Back in 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act imposed steep import taxes which hit the decorative arts world hard. Imports slowed dramatically. American manufacturers surged, but collectors seeking French, Chinese, or English pieces paid dearly, if they could find them at all. And as every student of history knows, history often has a way of repeating itself. One caveat to this scenario is the possibility of recession, or worse. I've actually been working on another video about the current state of the antiques market and putting together some graphs and economic data which show a significant decline in home purchases, employment, and economic activity starting in 2023, and that trend may still be in effect. Of course, that video got put on the back burner due to the tariffs, but I'll probably release it soon, so don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when it's ready. Now, let's get into some specifics of these new tariffs and potential price increases, and then I'll wrap up. As you can see from this chart, tariffs on imports from EU countries will be 20%, while imports from England will be 10%. Chinese imports will be taxed at a whopping 54%, and what's more, I was talking to a well-connected friend yesterday, and some lawyers are apparently suggesting that the 54% tariff on Chinese antiques may apply to items that are already in places such as Britain, depending on how long they have been there. So it may be the case that the Chinese items are required to be in Britain for a certain period of time before they qualify for the 10% tariff, as opposed to the 54% tariff. But this may be the most important question of all. Will these tariffs really stay high long enough to cause price changes? Please remember that many intelligent and informed people think that these tariffs have been put in place as a negotiating tactic and that they will come down or disappear completely relatively quickly. Of course, that depends on how various countries respond to the tariffs and whether they choose to negotiate or retaliate. In fact, as of April 6th, I'm already seeing reports that multiple countries, including the European Union, have reached out to the U.S. to negotiate. In any case, I think we can all choose to hope and pray that countries decide to negotiate lower tariffs on both sides, creating a more free and equitable trading environment, which could create greater prosperity throughout the entire world. So, are antique prices going up? Probably. Will tariffs change the way we buy and sell old treasures? Almost certainly. But here's the good news. The antique world has always adapted, and fine antiques only become more rare and valuable with time. As I've stated in past videos, the desire to connect with the past through items from earlier eras isn't going away, and the massive technological changes will only increase nostalgia and longing for the past. Well, that's my opinion anyway. I'd love to know your thoughts. How do you think these tariffs will affect you? If you notice price changes or shifts in availability, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you notice higher prices on American pieces and fewer imports, let me know and let's compare notes. Well, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you'd like to hear more about antiques and history in the future. Lastly, if you plan on adding some antique scenery to your home or office, please do consider Old Europe Antique Home Furnishings. We'll see you next time.